To celebrate the 10-year anniversary of Final Fantasy XIV, we have gotten a set of new short stories. These are being released post-patch 6.4, so keep that in mind. There may be spoilers for any content before that. This is the third story, In Storm's Wake. You have a letter, aha? It had been some time since the turmoil of the final days, and G'raha Tia was making the most of a rare moment of quiet. With a leisurely lunch out in the midday sun. Duty would eventually call him back to Baldestian Annex, however, and he had barely arrived when Kyle emerged from the office to greet him. In her hand was an envelope marked for his personal attention. A rare occurrence, as nearly all missives to the students received were addressed to the collective. He examined the envelope, and the elegant Eorzean script in which his name had been written. Noting that the sender's name was curiously absent. Availing himself of a letter opener from Oyika's desk, he quickly extracted the missive, and had barely begun to pore over its content when suddenly, a sharp gasp escaped his lips. Drawing a quizzical glance from Kyle and Oyika, in disbelief he read the message again to confirm his eyes were not deceiving him, before turning to his companions in bewilderment. "I've been invited to Doma for a private audience with Lord Hien." "Lord Hien?" Kral repeated doubtfully. "What business does he have with you?" I would very much like to know that myself. Had he bade me bring our adventurer friend, I could understand, but I haven't the faintest idea what he could possibly want with me." G'raha flipped the letter over and held it up to the light, searching for a clue, some hidden cipher or sign that might explain this unusual correspondence. Yet none was to be found. Conceding that there was no secret subtext, he began to contemplate how best to proceed when the Warrior Light stories of Doma sprang to mind. "Well, I can hardly reject an invitation from the great Lord Hien," he pondered aloud, hoping the word might convince his colleagues that duty and obligation were foremost in his thought. But the smiles playing on their lips quickly gave the lie to that. Donning what he hoped was a neutral expression, he ignored their knowing looks and the burning of his cheeks and set about making preparation to depart forthwith. Passing through Kugane, G'raha made for the small fishing village of Isari in the Ruby Sea, where a chartered skiff awaited him. From there, a gentle tide bore him along the One River all the way to the Doman Enclave. No sooner had he disembarked than a towering lupin welcomed him with a grateful bow, introducing himself as Hakuro, a retainer of Lord Hien. In keeping pace with the wolfman's giant stride, G'raha scarcely had time to take in the distinctive architecture of the enclave. Ornate stone walls with round gates and fan-shaped windows lined either side of the street. He got glimpse of craftsmen hard at work within, but quickly averted his gaze, lest he be distracted from the purpose of his visit. Duty first. At the end of the road stood a manor, nigh as grand as the mountain behind it. According to Hakuru, the structure had once been the residence of an enclave magistrate, but had since been renamed the Kienkan, roughly translated as the Swallow Homecoming, and had served as Lord Hien's domicile since the end of the imperial occupation. Hakuro ushered him inside and swiftly guided him through a labyrinthine series of walls. There was a unique floral fragrance in the air, though it was unclear if the aroma was inherited to the aged wood or if the halls were purposefully scented. In any case, the serene surrounding did little to settle his nerves. As G'raha struggled to recall what he knew of Far Eastern customs, he made a point to be mindful of his posture. He was no envoy, nor less an emissary come to stately business. But even so, his time as the Exarch had taught him the importance of appearances. I remember that much at least. At last he reached the center of the maze, and there, sitting cross-legged in a massive chamber, was the man he had come to see. "Well met, my friend. Pray accept my apologies for bringing you all this way," Ian said with a warm smile. They had met once before, when the leader of the Eorzean Alliance held council on the matter of Telforois. G'raha had been thrilled to meet the man he had only read about, a hero from an altogether different book of history. It was a tale that would thankfully never come to pass, and he knew all too well it served no purpose to entertain stories from its tattered pages. Thus he endeavoured to separate the man from the myth, electing simply to introduce himself as the newest member of the Scions. Since their first meeting, G'raha had known the Doman Lord to be ever bit as impressive as the heads of the other city-states. Yet, seeing him there in the Kienkan, reigned by the imposing ink painting of Yangxia, the man seemed somewhat larger than life. Blinking, G'raha reminded himself that Hien had been born the year after the annexation of Doma, which would make them the same age, but his demeanour betrayed no hint of youth. G'raha could only imagine the hardship he must have endured in his childhood to foster such a presence of mind. It was no trouble at all. I am most grateful for the invitation, though I'm not sure what I could have done to deserve such an honour. Is it truly me you wish to see? But of course, there is a matter upon which only your counsel will suffice. The young lord gestured for G'raha to sit, and he gratefully obliged, curious to hear what his host had to say. As Hien explained, the seed of change had begun to quicken in Garlemald, and Ratsatan, having reopened the trade with the Ravis nation, was now organizing a summit between the leader of the resurgent Garlean community and the dignitaries of various surrounding countries. Unless he further strained relations between Doma and Garlemald, Hien wished to gain insight into the Empire's present state. The acting viceroy of Locus Ammonius, or Corvos as it had formerly been known, would be in attendance, and intelligence regarding the province was therefore of particular interest. Recalling that Thancred had infiltrated Locus Ammonius during the final days, and trusting none more than the Scions to keep an accurate account of events in the midst of chaos, Hien had reached out to the grizzled rogue for the information he might care to disclose. Imagine my surprise when he told me there was another Scion better suited to the task, one who not only joined him on the mission, but hailed from Corvos beside. G'raha nodded slowly. Be that as it may, I was brought to Sharlayan as a child, and I have had little contact with Corvos since. I fear what knowledge I can provide may not prove as useful as you hope. It's not uncommon for those of us born in the provinces to become estranged from the land of our birth, Ian replied with a knowing smile. But I'm eager to hear whatever you're able to share. To this, G'raha gave a self-deprecating shrug, and after a moment's thought resolved to start with what he knew best, the province's history. If one were to ask who the land belonged to in the very beginning, both Corvosi and Garlean would surely claim it was their own. Yet from the perspective of a scholar of Allegan history, the facts were clear to see. It was the site of a provincial city founded by the Allegan Empire more than 5,000 years ago, when the Allegans sent scores of Miqo'te slaves to till the fertile land south of the continent of Ilspart. After numerous umbral calamities and centuries of war over territory and resources, however, only the Garleans and Corvosi had remained, and it was the latter who had subsequently driven the Garleans into the frigid northern wastes, where they would live in obscurity for 800 years. This lengthy exile had lasted until roughly 60 years prior to the present day, when Legatus and future Emperor Solus or Scalvus harnessed the power of Magitech to revolutionize the Garlean military. In the name of reclaiming their ancestral homeland, he marched Garlemald's great armies south to crush their former nemesis, who could find no answer to the might of the Empire's machina. After brutally subjugating the Corvosi, the Garlean wiped the name of Corvos from all the record, retitling it Locus Ammonius, as the only province in the history of Garlemald to have its name entirely erased. It was clear that Garleans were not above holding a grudge. To think it has been more than 50 years since the name Corvos became all but a footnote in annals of history, Ian murmured, no doubt imagining what might have become of Doma had it met similar fate. G'raha nodded. Thankfully, his legacy lives on in the city that remains, and the culture that survived there to this day. Yet it should not be forgotten that those who have taken the helm of governance were born during the period of imperial rule. G'raha remembered vividly the Corvosi response when the final days had arrived. Even allowing for the fact that it was a calamity without precedent, they had been slow to act, compared to neighboring Ratsatan. Not that this was entirely surprising. After Garlemald's destruction, a Corvosi youth, one notably not of Garlean descent, reported that the chain of command had quickly disintegrated once contact with the homeland had been lost. Ian closed his eyes and exhaled slowly as he considered G'raha's word. When at last we won our liberty from the Garleans, Doma had been an imperial province for 25 summers, Alamico for 20, but had either nation borne the empire yoke for another 10, or even 1, who's to say we could have prevailed? He paused for a moment, staring at the polished hardwood floor. It's difficult, after all, to find the strength to fight for a way of life you still remember. Aye, he continued. I can think of no force more formidable than time and its inexorable flow. Had it not been for my parents and guidance of my mentor Gosetsu, I cannot say with any certainty that my conviction would have held through the years. It may well have been washed away by the tides of time, my imperial education molding me into an altogether different man. I doubt there is a doman in this world who has lived a life free of the wages of imperial rule. Ian's face darkened as he recalled the suffering visited on him and the other children born during the imperial occupation. Without imperial citizenship, domans and Alamicans alike had become foreigners in their own land, branded savages by their subjugators. The only reprieve to be had from their mistreatment came from citizenship, which would only be obtained through distinguished service in the military. Yet to gain the favor of their oppressor was to invite the contempt of kith and kin, to be labeled a loyal hound of the empire. And so, from their earliest years, they struggled amidst a maelstrom of anger and resentment to discover who they were, Doman, Alamican, Garlean. Their elders might speak of halcyon days, but how were they to understand which they had never known? There was only the empire. A dreary silence fell upon the room. G'raha breathed deep of the calming floral aroma in the air, wondering how he might lighten the mood. After a moment of searching, the answer came to him. A historian and archaeologist like myself attempt to identify the turning point of civilization, where one era ends and another begins. Yet the reality is not so black and white. Rulers come and go, as may a country's name, but the people remain. Life goes on. When the winds of change blow, they set their sails accordingly, becoming the pioneers of new generation, their course leading them even onward. Their course leading them ever onward, be it unto joy or sorrow. And when centuries later, when we scholars look back upon their journey, we see the history not of a nation, but of people. Ian gave G'raha a look of faint surprise before bursting into laughter. Forgive me, my friend. It was not my intention to sour the mood, and yet I do not regret it, for I have been rewarded with such unexpected morsel wisdom. G'raha shrank back, his face reddening. Mayhap I spoke too freely? Not at all. You but spoke your mind. It's little wonder the Scion welcomed you with open arms, though for a moment I could have sworn I was listening to the word of a wizened sage. G'raha's ears dropped in embarrassment as he erupted into laughter once more. At length the young lord gestured apologetically and fixed G'raha with a grin. It's as you say, we must not fear change, but accept it as a part of life. The Doma beloved by our ancestors like our own, and that of our progeny, shall all become part of a single shared history. His grin fading, Ian gazed past G'raha as if peering into the future. It was a look G'raha knew well. He had seen it on the faces of other brave souls, who, no matter the hardship or danger, never strayed from their course. Brave souls who had saved the very star. Recalling them, Graha pictured the Doma of tomorrow. Whatever lay in the store for this liberated land in the era he and his people would help shape, he looked forward to seeing it. "Well," Ian said at last, "I suppose there's nothing for it but to make the most of this summit and set our sails accordingly. Come, tell me more of Corvus. I would know of his delicacies. There is no better way to find common ground with another than through his bellies." Ian stood as he spoke, pausing when he saw the look of confusion on Graha's face. He chuckled softly. "Surely you do not think me so heartless as to make you speak of such delights on an empty stomach. You have travelled far to answer my questions, and as my honoured guest, you shall taste the best of what Doma has to offer." Graha's stomach growled in response. His confusion quelled and appetite duly whetted, he stood up and together with Ian exited the Kian. Across the one river he could see the ruined remnant of what once stood as the very centre of the symbol of the land, Doma Castle. Yet the enclave was bustling with people, determined to restore and rebuild. Even after the storm of blood, the people remained to usher in the dawn of a new era, and life goes on.